Okay, so this is the second in a series of 3 that we have, and we're calling this Last Planner System 201 as opposed to 101, which is really kind of the introduction class. So this one's a little more advanced. There's actually enough material for a 301 class down the line for those that might be interested, but more on that later. So anyhow, this is who we were talking about earlier tonight, Greg Howell. Greg Howell is this gentleman in the image right here where the cursor is right next to me. Joined a pint of Guinness in Ireland last year. To his, well, to the left side in the red shirt is Glenn Ballard. The 2 of them basically are the co-founders of the Last Planner System and among the co-founders of the Lean Construction Institute. So if you've used the Last Planner System, you have much to give credit to these 2 gentlemen. And if you participate in LCI, you know, they were instrumental in making that happen. So Greg, you'll be missed, but deep body of knowledge and a great legacy to leave behind. So is the glass half full, half empty? Or from a lean thinking perspective, why is the glass twice the size it should be? Okay, so there we go. If you're a Guinness drinker, you want the glass to certainly be full. Okay. All right, so tonight's stage, we got a 3-act play for you. The first one is Last Planner and Design. The second act, common mistakes and opportunities for improvements when implementing Last Planner. So we're going to share probably 15 things that we see teams routinely do. And if you happen to see projects that you know throughout the course of this night, don't be surprised. There's some San Diego projects. There's even some Irish projects in here, Willie. And then closing out with Act 3, which is really talk a little bit about what are some of the technologies that are available out there to support Last Planner, and particularly in a COVID-19 environment. So we'll give you a little bit of background tied to that. Okay, so Act 1. Quick review of 101, Last Planner and Design, and Scrum. Okay, so that's where we are. So push versus pull. Let's start out with that concept because Last Planner is a pull production system. Okay, and our traditional scheduling processes are very much push based. If we're thinking about critical path method scheduling, or our superintendents out in the field telling the trade contractors where they should be and when they should be there. Okay, but the concept of pull is this. So when you need something, that you're actually responding to the demand for that at that particular time. We like to use the term, we heard some kids on the phone earlier tonight, but in a non-COVID environment where you got to pick up your kids from school, or you got to drop them off at school or pick them up from daycare, that's a milestone that you're pulling to, and what are all the activities you need to accomplish in order to get there. Same thing if you're flying. When do you have to hit your flight? What are all the things you have to do in order to not miss your flight? If you miss your flight, the consequences, right? So you're really pulling to that particular milestone. So very quickly, the Last Planner has got 5 major elements, okay? And they're really kind of connected conversations, but milestone planning at very high level, a phase pull, where you're really looking to some type of interim milestone, typically in the 3 or 4 month range. So planning in more detail as you're getting closer. Look ahead planning, which is typically a 6-week make work ready plan. Weekly work planning, we don't have up here is daily huddles, but that's part of the learning and improving process. And then really using that as a feedback loop using Deming's plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, study, adjust cycle. Okay, so if we look at it in a little bit different perspective, same 5 elements of the system here, but they're really cogs in a wheel, okay? Without all of these things working together, it doesn't function to its full potential. And what we see a lot of teams, and we'll talk more about this in detail a little bit later, is teams don't always use all 5 elements of this. And you can certainly benefit from using bits of it, but if you use it as a system, it is extremely powerful. So what do these look like? So you get a milestone plan, that informs your phase pull. Notice in this case, they're starting from a milestone where there's 2 red diamonds are, and then basically pulling from there. They've got a look ahead planning board, weekly work planning in more detail, and the daily huddle. Okay. So some other things that are worth noting. We hear this a lot, but having a common vocabulary, constraints versus predecessors. Okay. And the way that we use the 2 of these is different. Okay. A predecessor is an activity by somebody else on the team that is going to release your work. Okay. It's the handoff, if you will, between a trade. So the framer has to be complete with the wall before the electrician and the plumber can rough in behind the framer. If you are in a design capacity and you're basically the electrical engineer, you need to know what the motor size is on your air handler or your chiller in order to size your electrical feed for that unit. So that's the predecessor. A constraint is something outside of the immediate control of the team. Okay, so these tend to be big picture items, things like building permits or maybe an air discharge permit, long lead equipment. Switchgear almost always falls in this category. Chillers, gen sets if you have them. A lot of times specialty glass, some of the skin systems that are coming from Europe fall in this category. Owner decisions, okay? When's the last responsible moment for an owner to make a decision on what they want to do on something? Submittal approvals and RFI responses, if it's not a design build project or if it's not a integrated form of agreement, those can all be constraints. So why is that? So that's important to track those, because if you don't track them and manage them and remove them, they will stop the project dead in its tracks or create all kinds of cascading effects. Okay. So how do you teams best do this? Well, maintaining some type of constraint log. Okay. Certainly you can do this in Excel format. We highly recommend that teams do this visually and post it on the wall, because what happens if you do it on the cloud or you're doing it in an Excel spreadsheet, it gets basically out of sight, out of mind. And our recommendation to teams is that they start each of their weekly meetings with this constraint log for the status update. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think that the constraint log is so important, because if you start seeing that there is a constraint that's not being removed and it's starting to impact, you have to start maybe going up a little level higher and finding out who can chase that down, because we have a champion on all the constraints, but maybe they need to go somewhere a little bit higher and inform the person who's making the decision or who can remove that it's impacting the project, and here how's it's impacting it. They might not be aware that their decision has to be made and it's having impact. So keeping this, finding out when it's going to impact and when it's really needs to be kicked up another level to somebody else who can properly remove that constraint.
Yeah. So there are really kind of 3 major things that absolutely have to be in any kind of constraint log, whether it's in electronic format or otherwise. But number 1, a description, a clear description of what the constraint is. 2, a champion within the team that is responsible for shepherding or bird dogging that to completion. They may not have direct control over it, but they have to be the point of interface with whoever the outside party is. So for switchgear, probably the electrical contractor has got to be the point person as the champion with the electrical supplier. And then what's the date that you actually need it? So if you don't have it on site, it's going to create cascading effects. So those are kind of the 3 major elements that you really need to have in your constraint log. And we see teams regularly not do this, and it's a real opportunity to do better. Okay, swim lanes. Swim lanes can be very important in Last Planner, particularly when you start to get in larger projects or you have projects that have multiple elements to them, whether it be geographic buildings, whether it be different areas where you've broken it into quadrants or on the floors. But making the swim lanes understandable is important, okay? And it's important to do that before you actually get to the wall, if possible, because here's what happens. You end up putting 200 or 300 stickies up on the wall, and now all of a sudden you got to rearrange them all. That creates all kinds of chaos and waste in the process and frustration and other things. So Here's a project. Dan, you may recognize this. I don't know if we have anyone on the line from Berg, but somebody, obviously there's someone from Berg here in this image. But these are swim lanes. And in this particular case, this is actually a judicial project. It's a prison or a reform place. But basically what they've done is they've broken this into swim lanes by various elements of the project, including the central utility plant, some of the various other parts of the complex, and really tracked it that way. You'll notice that the swim lanes in this case, you've got multiple color tags, which means that the trades are going up through that swim lane in that order, okay? Other teams use swim lanes just for the trades. There's nothing right or wrong about any of this. It's what works for the team. But take advantage of the swim lanes so you really help get your work organized.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add? Nope. Great. Okay, so what's the difference between last planner in construction versus design? So we run into this a lot of times, which is kind of a challenge in that if you try and do a last planner with a 6-week make work ready plan for a design team, particularly with architects, it doesn't work very well, okay? The whole design process is really not well suited for last planner production planning for production of walls and partitions and skin and concrete. It's all about information flow. So what are the differences? So milestone planning and phase pull planning remain the same, okay? But what we see is differences, particularly when we introduce Scrum into this. Rather than a 6-week make work ready planning, we're doing sprint planning, okay? And the weekly meetings still occur, and the learning and improving still occur with daily stand-ups. And rather than percent plan complete metrics, we start looking at burndown charts. And we'll show you some examples of all this here a little later. But the learning cycle there is much shorter, going from to the sprint planning, and the sprints typically are no longer than a month long in general terms. The shorter the sprints, the better they are. So think about it that way, as opposed to 6 weeks. But those are the kind of the major things. So the top 2 elements, milestone planning, phase pull, remain the same. The sprint planning and how you execute that is different. So we're still talking about design versus construction. We're really talking about information flow now. So what information do I need from whoever it may be in order to complete my design? Maybe another design discipline. It could be input from a specialty trade or the builder. It could be a decision by the owner or the owner's stakeholders. It could be from a lot of different sources. But the idea here is it's all about information flow to make timely decisions versus having reliable, predictable workflow of production of construction-related value. Okay. All right, so let's look at some actual projects with some milestone and phase pull planning. This is actually a County of San Diego project, the design build project. Some of you may recognize Ralph Rosling there in the blue shirt. The guy with the back to us is John Schur, who used to be part of our core group at one point in time before he went off to do other things. But they basically did a milestone plan for deliverables, and they actually had 3 separate elements of this project. One was a new library at Adam Borrego Springs. Adjacent to that was a new sheriff substation, and in between the 2 was a new park. And so 3 very distinctly different stakeholders, 1 project, 3 sources of funds, and really trying to make all of that work effective. Anything you want to add? No? Okay, this is a project in Thousand Oaks. This is actually at Amgen. And this is a milestone plan. Some of you may recognize the back of that gentleman's head there. That's our good friend, Dan Fauché. We co-facilitated this particular project. But what it was is really planning. They were bringing a new, a mothballed pharmaceutical production line back online with a different pharmaceutical product. So they had to do a couple of things. First off, they had to evaluate what of the existing systems still worked well. And then secondly, what adaptations or modifications did they need to make to the process systems in order to deliver the new pharmaceutical product. Okay. This is actually a project with Kaiser Permanente up in the Bay Area. And they actually used, it really is not so much of a design and construction project as it was for rollout of a new enterprise resource platform for their entire organization. They have about a $10 billion capital spend, that's with a B. And they really needed to get this right. It touched so many different departments. And I think that they ended up with 7 swim lanes on this particular project to really help facilitate, what needed to happen and when. Okay, so that's milestone planning. So as we said, that's the same whether you're in construction or whether you're in design. Baseball. So Chris, you may recognize some of these characters. In fact, I see you in there if you look hard enough. But this was actually here in San Diego at CRB's office for a project they were working on up in LA, and they were doing a design phase pull. This is a phase pull for that same project we saw up in Amgen. So start looking at what are some of the dates that they have. They have a few milestones up here that they've captured that they're pulling to, and really having some very significant discussions at the board tied to what do they need to do in order to really assess the systems. This is a phase pull in Ireland. Actually, this is for the National Children's Hospital of Ireland for one of their satellite facilities where they were basically doing a significant addition as part of a rather large program. I think it's headed towards 2 billion euros at this point based on our knowledge. But really working hard to try and understand what they needed to do in the design process to get to the next design deliverable. Okay. All right, which takes us to Scrum. And Scrum Summer is
it's a framework.
It's a framework, okay. And so what's a framework? Go ahead.
Well, it's just an area where that you have roles and responsibilities in this framework to help deliver products to your clients. So.
Yeah, so it's really, Scrum is designed for helping manage a framework for making decisions and delivering complex products, whether they be software. You could use it in other applications as well. Boeing might benefit from this, I would think. But anyhow, it's based on work by Jeff Sutherland. He's a co-creator of Scrum. And kind of the history behind Scrum, those who've heard Felipe Engineer talk, the Jeff and his team were basically fans of rugby. They were watching the Kiwi All Blacks, who's one of the most famous rugby teams, and they were doing a scrum, and so they did, that name stuck. So there you have it. But here's the manifesto for Agile software development. Okay, so there are kind of 4 major points. Do you want to cover these?
Okay.
What?
Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documents, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. Okay.
All right. So all those things sound kind of lean to me. Okay. So very, very nice blend into what we do. Okay. So if we look at waterfall versus agile model, so the waterfall, kind of think of that in a CPM context, but if you talk to anyone in the software development industry, they'll talk about waterfall, which is essentially a Gantt chart with CPM logic and tasks go end to end, just like they are in this top line. But essentially you're planning, you're designing, you're building, then you test, then you fix it, then you test it again, and then you deploy it if it's good enough or you have some more fixes to do. But the idea behind an Agile framework is this, in that you plan in smaller iterative batches, which allows you to learn more quickly and make adjustments faster, okay? So think about the difference in this approach from a design. So the designers that are on the call here, if we think about a linear point-to-point design where we start and we just continue to design in a kind of a vacuum, that's a challenge because we need information from other disciplines as well as stakeholders and the owner to really help inform that design. So the lower series seems to work pretty well, particularly in a lean design context where you have cluster groups and are really trying to make decisions tied to what's in the best interest of the project as opposed to what's easiest for a particular discipline.
And if something isn't right, you find out earlier in the design phase, and you can just start reworking it instead of waiting, you know, which you're so far down. Now making a change is really going to have a huge impact on the process and the project length.
Great. Good point. Okay, so if we talk about incremental versus iterative, this is kind of a great example. So the incremental solution is the top one, okay? And that you got two wheels, then you have some kind of a chassis to put on there, and then, oh yeah, well, we'll design the cab, and then we'll design the box and the drivetrain, and all of a sudden we now have a box truck, okay? Versus the bottom, which is more of an iterative, okay, we need a means of locomotion. All right, it needs two wheels. Okay, let's try a bicycle. And what if we motorize it? Then we have a motorcycle. And what if we end up enclosing the motorcycle? Now we got a car. And what if we want to transport more than just people, but actual material and products? Okay, and that evolves into a van. So what we're trying to do is get to more of a thought process on the bottom as opposed to the top, because we get more innovation, we get more creative solutions, and we can create more value with that approach.
And you can deliver something earlier of what they wanted and just keep making corrections and fixes and expanding it instead of them having to wait until the very end of the design. So they're actually going to have something that they can, get them transportation at the very beginning, and following that through and just getting better and better as each phase is developed. Yeah. And you're getting feedback from your client too. Is this what you're looking for? Is this what you're looking for? And getting that and expanding it instead of just, well, I think this is what they want, and coming up with something at the very end.
Great. All right, so what are some of the key principles of the Scrum framework? Okay, so there is the plan, do, check, act cycle is very much embedded into that, but there's a shared accountability. That sounds very lean to you, sounds very collaborative to me. Self-organizing, okay? Small batches, so lean's very much about trying to improve flow, and how do you do that? Well, one way is by reducing batch size, sure. Deliver product in shorter cycles, okay? Team retrospection, so reflection. How did we, what did we learn? How could we do better? So that whole continuous improvement piece of it. And then regular client feedback. So are we creating value? Are we delivering the value proposition? Is there something we should be doing differently? So also kind of key to, key concepts of lean, okay? So you want to talk to this one?
Go ahead.
All right. So one of the key concepts if you're developing software, so think about, how many times you have to update your apps on your phone. It's almost a daily thing for something on your phone. But the idea is this: when you're rolling things out for software development, what's good enough? Okay, where do you reach the point of diminishing returns? And that's kind of where you want to, disembark. Same type of thing in design. So think about that if you're designing a building or you're designing a process. At what point is have you increased the most value or delivered the most value? So if you're the electrical engineer, at what point is the best point for handing that off to the electrical trade contractor to do what they need to do? Do you need to have the complete design? Probably not. So the real question is those conversations that help define what good enough is. Okay, so roles. So there's some different roles in Scrum. So you want to cover these, Summer? We're going to talk about responsibilities on the next slide.
Okay, well, the roles, there's the product owner, who really is the person who defines what the product is, and who defines what the deliverable. It's the deliverable that he is negotiating with his clients or the end users. And he's the person who has the why or the what. And then the development team is a smaller group of 3 to 9 people. Here it says that the equivalent would be a design team. And they're the ones that do the how. How are we going to design this and implement it to get the product, the deliverable that the owner wants? And then the Scrum Master, he's more of the facilitator and removes a lot of the roadblocks. Okay.
So this is pretty much what Summer just captured there. So, but on the responsibility side, think of the product owner as really kind of the client manager. So what's the value proposition for the customer? I mean, that's the product owner's responsibility, and that could be a different person within each organization, but in Scrum, that's who owns that. Development team is the design team, and if you want to do draw the comparisons to how that works in our world. And then the Scrum Master essentially is the facilitator, the catalyst, the roadblock remover. Okay, so
He helps to define and help the product owner understand what they want for the deliverable, and helps to relate that to the development team so they understand exactly what it is that the product owner is looking for.
Yeah. One of our English friends asked Summer after she got her Scrum Master certification why she wasn't a Scrum Mistress.
Right.
So I guess English have inquiring minds. Okay, so we talked about 6-week make work ready planning and lean and Last Planner 101, which is really 6-week, typically with boards, but people do it other ways. But essentially, it's some type of wall work that can be translated into digital format if you want. But in Scrum, you're using sprints, okay, which is essentially a board. It can be done in the same kind of context, whether it's a wall, whether it's a sheet of paper, whether it's a whiteboard, whether it's an electronic format, all of those work, okay? But essentially, you've got 3 major categories with respect to the way we approach design in our world, but backlog, doing, and done. There's sprint planning, so think our weekly planning meetings, daily stand-ups, so think daily huddles for the craft. Same type of thing with the design professionals. You don't have to all necessarily be in the same location, but you should all have a daily stand-up at the same time. Easy enough to do with Zoom or anything else in COVID-19 times. And then doing a review once you're done with the sprint, so some type of reflection or retrospection on, how could, what were our roadblocks, how could we go faster? Okay, so really trying to learn and continuously improve as part of the process. Okay, so when we're thinking about how do we translate Scrum or integrate Scrum into Last Planner, so think about traditional design deliverables, and in a building information modeling world, these probably don't hold true, but there's still lots of owners that ask for these as deliverables. But your schematic design documents, your design development documents, and your construction documents. But think about from a milestone plan. So if you're thinking about this in a lean context, okay, when do we need to kind of lock in our structural system? When do we need to lock in the grids so that we can really do our final load calculations? And you can see that now we also have a lock-in electrical loads as part of the plan here. But there are also specific packages that may be headed out. So foundation could be a fast track package that would go out. What are the tasks that are necessary to support that? You got a mill order for your steel, provided that it's going to be a steel frame structure. What do you need in order to release that mill order? Okay. And in each of these tasks, there are opportunities for those small feedback loops that we were seeing in the iterative process. And then you also have mechanical buyout. So if we're looking at the major pieces of equipment and this, that, and the other thing, how do we end up doing that effectively? So this is an example from the LA Rams Stadium. Okay, the Walter P. Moore is the structural engineer of record for that project, and they were kind enough to share this. They actually presented this project to us, I think it was 2 summers ago. I think it was well, no, they came down here to San Diego to Gensler's office about 2 years ago. But what they did is that you'll see that they've got tags, and each of these tags here relates to building backlog for the structural engineering analysis and design. So concept detail for this particular type of connection. Okay, and there's some numbers on those. Summer's going to talk about that in a minute. Basis of design document, detailed calculations, okay, batch calculations for the whole series of connections that we're going to deal with that are similar to the concept detail, and then a detail markup and an export schedule that's all tied to that, so that the mill fabricator has got what they need. So you'll notice that they've got these numbers on each of those, and they tie to what's called the Fibonacci sequence. Okay, And if you haven't heard about the Fibonacci sequence, maybe you'll recognize some of these things in nature which are described by the Fibonacci sequence, everything from hurricanes to nebula to flowers to nautiloids to DNA spiral. So, but you want to share with them the Fibonacci sequence?
Well, 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 2 is 3. So you have the first two numbers, you add them together. And so now here we have a 3 + 5 is 8, then 8 + 5 is 13, 8 + 13 is 21, and so on. And it just continues on and keeps getting larger and larger. So do you want to say why it's important?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're using those numbers. A lot of times people are using 1 to 10 for a level of effort or something. Is it rated between 1 and 10? Well, that's okay, but sometimes it's hard to differentiate between a 2 and a 3 or a 3 and a 5. You know, so to try and get better at estimating how long something's going to take or the level of effort for something, it's easier to tell the level of a 5 to a 13 and a 13 to a 34. So that, well, it's going to take you at least twice as long to do something. So it gives you a little bit better way of addressing and assigning numbers to tasks. So
yeah. So the point of this, you'll see here in a minute, is that it ties back to some Burndown charts that we're going to show you. And it's important not to confuse the numbers tied to the level of effort to hours, okay? And that a lot of people want to put hours into this, but for the purposes of what we're trying to achieve with getting better and understanding the velocity, you'll hear the term velocity sometimes used in Scrum. It's all tied to the number of points that you can complete in the same amount of time with the same resources, okay? And that's kind of one of your key metrics as you move forward. Okay, so we talked a little bit earlier about Scrum boards, but essentially, you have a backlog. Sprint number 7, this is actually what's going on, and then done on the far side. When your tags are done, you don't remove them till the end of the sprint. But the idea here is that you can very quickly, at a visual sense, really think Kanban board here, that you quickly can see what's in progress and what still needs to be done and what's been completed. Now, the other thing to note is that on the backlog piece of the Scrum board here, these tags should be in order of importance of what should be done next. So if we look at the yellow tags here on the far left, that top tag on the left-hand side should be the next thing that whoever owns that yellow tag should do. And what that does is it allows the teams to prioritize their work. Everybody else knows that. And in the daily huddles, if someone else needs something from someone else for some reason, then the priorities can change and they can have that discussion. But that's typically, a very good way to visually track are you doing the most important thing or doing the thing you should be doing right now? Okay. So there we go, Scrum board, to do, doing, done. Pretty simple. Okay. Seen some people do Scrum boards with their kids as part of the COVID-19 response. I mean, that's pretty cute. Whether they do homework or playtime or computer time or outside time, whatever it might be. Then there are a number of packages available or software solutions out there. Summer and I both use Trello. I know Felipe, engineer with McCarthy, also uses Trello. We're working with a team up in Boise, Idaho with a private developer where they're using Trello to manage all of their design process as well. Seems to work pretty effectively. You may have heard of Atlassian. Atlassian and Trello have recently merged. So you may hear that as well. So you heard us talking about Burndown charts, okay? And so typically sprints are shorter duration, as we said, 4 weeks or less. And so a month is probably a good planning horizon for most design teams. What are we going to do this month? Working towards some type of interim design deliverable. And what will happen is that you'll end up with a certain number of points. And so coming back to that Fibonacci sequence, in this case, this is a week or 5-day sprint. They've got 80 points that they need to accomplish in order to hit their target for the week and accomplish the sprint. And so those Fibonacci numbers that have been assigned to each of those tasks, and we're going to show you some examples here in a minute, total up to 80. which means that you need to be averaging 20 points a day in order to get this done in a 5-day sprint. Okay, or was it? No, I guess I'm thinking 100.
Yeah.
So it'd have to be something, whatever that equates to be, 16, math in my head, getting old. But anyhow, what this burn down chart shows you is that the red line, or the one that's pretty much in a straight line in this case, is your straight burn down chart if you're burning a regular number of points each day. If you got where the happy face is here to the left, you're actually working faster than you anticipated, and then something happened on day 3. I don't know, something just hit the team hard and stopped the work, nothing got accomplished, they needed an answer to some kind of an issue. And what that did is it pushed them into days 4 and 5, became really crazy busy to get everything done, okay? But this is the way, kind of an equivalent to a percent plan complete chart. This really gives you a sense of, are we on track for where we need to be to achieve our desired outcome?
And if you're not, then what matters can we use to get back on track? Do we have to pull somebody else in? Do we have, what do we need to make sure that we hit the goal for the burn down chart? So that's get the whole team collaborating and finding out that answer, because you really don't want to ever move the sprint goal.
Yeah. So what do you need from me in order to help that? Or what do you need from the team? What do you need from whoever it may be in order to go faster? Okay, so let's walk through an example on a project. So this is at LAX airport, and some of you may be aware that they've got a huge program going on there right now, about 16 billion. They're bringing in a new automated people mover, and the people mover basically is going to touch not all the terminals there, but have access to all the terminals. In some cases, it'll be dual terminals, but this particular team is building all of the enhancements and modifying the structures to be able to receive the passengers that are coming through the automated people mover when that comes online. So Tom Bradley International Terminal, there's a combination of what they call Terminal 5.5. It's a combination of Terminal 5 and 6, and then a separate stop at Terminal 7. So it's a pretty sizable project, about $340 million in rough terms. So anyhow, this is part of the design process. You can see that they have some milestones. All the purple magenta diamonds are milestones tied to certain design deliverables. And they are doing their phase pull with the activities that they need to do for their work, okay? Now, there's a forward pass. So think about this. You see this in construction, do the same thing in design, where in this case, the design manager for the team or the project did a forward pass. So he's kind of doing the same role as a superintendent typically would for a forward pass on a construction project. And does this make sense from a sequencing perspective? Do we have these in the right order? Should we need to make earlier decisions for some of these things, and really having the conversations that need to happen with the design team so that everyone's got a common understanding of what the design production plan is. Okay. All right. So now they've done the milestone plan, they finished their phase pull, and so on the right-hand side of this, they're actually doing their Scrum board. Okay. So what happens is that those activities that are planned in the phase pull, you end up looking at, okay, out of the phase pull for the next month, what are all the tasks that are necessary to accomplish those activities and meet the milestone that we're pulling to? And that goes to populate the Scrum board. Okay.
Yep. And they're using the same tags like you do at Last Planner. Every color is a discipline, and you just keep working that board so it's so visual, so people can understand who's going to be where and what they're going to be doing just by looking at the board, knowing the colors and who they represent.
Super. Okay, so looking at this, so this is a little closer view, but you can see on the backlog and the doing, you start to see some of these numbers. Okay, and so there's some of these that have, I see 2s, I see 13s, I see a 5, I see some 34s, 13, 2, 2, 34, 3. What do you think the problem is with the 34? What's the problem with the 34, Summer?
it's a big chunk, and they could probably break it down into smaller increments.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So we see the same thing in construction. Electricians tend to be the worst offenders. I don't know if we've got any electricians on the line tonight, but with long duration task, okay? So any task that is more than 10 days in a last plan or phase pull can be broken into smaller tasks, either by zone or by specific activity. They may not want to do that, but it will help plan the work, and it will also help get better production, more reliable, predictable workflow.
But it also releases some of that work for somebody else who is relying on getting that information or that work done. Now they get a little bit of it sooner so that they can start their planning and they can start their project, their work on the project.
Yeah. So you'll see here in the bottom right, there's you'll see a scale there. It says 366. So if we totaled up all those points that they had there, they had 366 points they needed to get accomplished in 3 weeks. So it was a 3-week sprint. So that meant they had to get 122 points done a week in order to make certain that they hit their production plan for this particular sprint. Okay, so jumping ahead a little bit, same project. What we just looked at there was for one of the smaller terminals. This is for Tom Bradley International Terminal, and this is their backlog doing and done. You'll notice on the far right, they've got a constraints log. This is a write-on wall, and you can notice that they've got the date and description of what it is, date required, and the responsible person or champion. They've got a key. They've got all their major milestones from the full plan up top that they're trying to hit. And you'll notice that the Fibonacci numbers, they actually put those up there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 13, 21, and 34. And parenthetically next to 34, it says bad, okay? Because they were having trouble with the tasks that were 34, getting them done in time. So one of the countermeasures was to break that into smaller pieces of work. So there you go. And, you know, they should have their big room daily Scrum stand-up. And as I said, you don't have to physically be there. In this case, they have about 90 or 100 people in this big room at LAX. And, you know, a great environment for them to work in. But the bottom line is that you could do this with people wherever they're at in the world and accomplish the same thing. Okay, and the main thing is to make certain that you're focused. You've got but really the idea behind these daily stand-ups is very similar to the daily huddles in that, you know, hey, everyone get everything accomplished, and not so much are they get everything accomplished you expect it to, but is anyone being held up? So it's more of an exceptions. Is anyone being held up? Okay. If so, what is it? What do you need from us? Number 2 is what can make us go faster? Okay. So those are really kind of the 2 things that get asked. Anything you want to add to that? No. And these don't need to be more than about 10 minutes. Okay. So there we go. All right, so that concludes Act 1. So now we're on to Act 2, common mistakes and opportunities to do more. Okay. So you saw this graphic already, but we see this, I would say out of all the teams that we worked with, and we probably worked with, I don't know, somewhere between 50 and 70 project teams, I would say 80% of them have opportunities to do better at all 5 elements of this. Okay, some of them do some of it really well, but they don't do a good job of all 5 pieces. Okay, so there's a lot of opportunity out there. So that's why we kind of started off with this one. Okay, understanding your constraints. Okay, failure to identify and manage them. Okay, anytime we get to a meeting and someone, it doesn't matter whether this is the very first meeting we go to or whether it's a weekly meeting, if someone comes up and says, wow, I got a new constraint and I need it ASAP, what does that mean, Summer?
Bad planning?
Poor planning, that's right. So, you know, those, we shouldn't really have those kinds of surprises. I mean, there really shouldn't be that kind of thing. We did a constraints analysis and log with an Irish company for a €1 billion data center in Europe. And, you know, they identified probably half a million euros worth of savings to the project just by identifying the constraints early enough to remove them before they became issues. Okay. sorry for the pixelation on this one, but what I wanted to show is this is a 6-week make work ready plan. I think this actually comes from an LCI post. But what's a challenge with this? There are no milestones posted up on this wall. All activities. I could tell that they have swim lanes by trade, as you can tell by the colors, as opposed to areas. But that's the way they've elected to do it, and that's fine. But they don't have any milestones. And here's the challenge. If you don't have milestones, you don't necessarily know that you're on track to accomplish what you need to for the job. You can have a very high PPC or percent plan complete, but if you are missing significant milestones, you may not be delivering what the customer is expecting. So have enough interim milestones in your project to make certain that you're pulling those particular milestones and having those conversations as you go to make adjustments to your production plan to pull it this direction, whether that means working a Saturday, whether that means adding resources, or that means resequencing work, whatever the solution may be. Okay, so here's another one. And this one comes, it's a, once again, swim lanes by trade. And in this case, they don't have weekends, they're just Monday through Friday, but there's no milestones. Okay, and
Are there predecessors within?
no, there are no predecessors either. Just and this one I can't tell what it says, but it's the blue one. It's the same word 20 times. So I'm not quite certain that that's got enough detail in it. Okay. Effective meetings. Okay. So what happens if meetings don't start on time or people show up late? It's disrespectful for those that show up on time, for one. But what happens if things go off on a tangent? Okay, that happens with meetings all the time. And so, number one, what is your desired outcome for the meeting? So, teams that have that laser focus on this is what we want to achieve in this meeting are much more likely to accomplish that. Two, specific time limits tied to that also help. Three, the use of a parking lot. Okay, so that if there's an issue that's important, someone feels that they've been heard, this is not the appropriate forum, we need to put that in the parking lot. This is another technique that we like. It's called the yellow card, red card. So anyone that's ever played soccer or watched soccer or has kids that have played soccer probably understands this, but basically everyone in the group or the meeting has cards, yellow and red. They don't have to be official soccer cards. They can just be, it can be Post-its, they can be 3x5 cards that say red and yellow, whatever the case is. But the idea is this, and that if someone's off target, everyone in the room has the ability to raise a yellow card as a caution, okay? And that, hey, I think we're getting off target. If another person on the team raises a yellow card, that's a warning, okay? And at that point in time, you got 60 seconds to wrap up your discussion. Or someone will give you the red card and it goes to the parking lot. But what that does is it gives you a way for the team to interact with individuals that may be a little bit more forceful in their communication or dominating in the way that they want to have their own agenda addressed. So just wanted to hijacking the meeting. So we just wanted to share that as a technique for you to consider if that's an issue for you. Okay, another common thing that we see is putting a phase pull on the wall, but not doing a check to see whether the total days of work on the tags are less than the total days available to do the work that meets your milestone. Okay, we see this regularly where people go up and put their tags up, and I'll go up there and I'll total up the days and say it's say they have 70 working days available for this particular phase pull. And if we look at the way the tags are set up there and the sequencing of the tags, it's a 95-day worth of work. Well, 70 days available, 95 days worth of tags. Okay, 25-day bust. Okay, all right, team, we got to have a talk about, are these the right durations? Is this the right sequence? And really kind of have a serious talk about that. So here's one where we actually worked with a team. Got 18 days there, 28 days total, 17 days. I don't remember what the other one was, but this is part of the analysis. So you can see here that you got durations on all the tags, on what they are. Somebody here said 5+, but anyhow, I guess that's at least 5, sandbagging a little bit. But anyhow, this is an important step that we don't always see teams do to really make certain that it's just not visual planning, that you've actually made certain that the available time is sufficient for the production plan to be implemented. Okay, having the right people in the meeting, okay? There's a missing piece to the puzzle here, and if the person that has that missing piece of the puzzle is not in the room, man, that is a problem. Okay, so having people in the room that can make the right decision. We've been on integrated form of agreement projects where we didn't have the right people in the room, or the people in the room weren't the right people from the context that they didn't feel that they had the authority to act on behalf and make decisions on behalf of their company because they were new to the company. And that created all kinds of
We've had last planner ones where people in the room, they were just told by their company to show up, and they really weren't familiar with the project and really wouldn't commit to any milestones or to any of the plan. They kept saying, well, this is, I don't feel comfortable, I don't understand it, and they just wouldn't make those commitments. So the team really had to work hard in order to try and understand how they could move forward with this person not making the commitments.
So one countermeasure for this is that for particularly the kickoffs for the milestone plan and the first phase pool is to make certain not only do you have your superintendents and foremen there, but to have the project managers who control the resources. Because if they understand what their commitments are, then they're really making a commitment on behalf of the organization. And the foreman and the superintendents, depending on the situation, will feel a lot more confident in what they're doing or asking for what they need in order to meet those commitments. Anything else you want to put in? No? Okay. All right, daily huddles. Since we don't have a team here anymore, this is our new team, Seattle Seahawks. But think about this. I mean, daily huddles. We run into teams that don't do daily huddles with Last Planner. And I will say that there's one thing that's a common denominator on every project that we see that's successful. The superintendent has a daily huddle with everybody on the team. And I think if you have a daily stand-up with your Scrum team, the same thing will happen. But think about this. Yes, you have a hurry-up offense, but what would happen if the offense didn't huddle, in order to really get their plan for the next play? Okay, that's really what the daily huddle is all about. Okay, what's our next play? Are we going to run? Are we going to pass? Is it a fake play action? What are we going to do? Then everyone's on the same page, hopefully, and don't have any false starts or anything like that. But the idea here is the same for construction and for design, in that, we have a huddle. It's a small group. Everyone knows what they're doing. What's my piece of that? But making certain that we all are trying to execute the same plan. Reverting to old behaviors. This is supposed to be an angry construction worker, but the idea here is that when things get tough, people try to tend to revert to what they're familiar with, and sometimes bad behaviors can come out of that that aren't supportive to collaborative planning and really kind of looking at. Normally I put a picture in here of a sinking boat with two guys in the bow saying, well, I'm sure glad the hole isn't on our end. But the reality is that if the job goes south, everybody on the job suffers without question, because it doesn't matter.
Command and control a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about swim lanes earlier, but using them effectively. Okay, whether they be for geographic areas, whether they be for separate buildings or separate elements of scope, whether they be for site work. When you start getting on $1 billion project, you really need to think hard about how you're going to do this, and whether that is a medical center, whether it's a data center, whether it's a pharmaceutical plant. You really need to give that some significant thought to really help your production plan. Okay, I'll call this breaking the 5-day curse. Okay, so whenever we go do an initial session with a team, a lot of times, I would say that probably 90 or 95% of the tags are 5-day duration or a multiple of 5-day duration. Okay. as opposed to what they really are. And so people are putting buffer in there. And part of that is just a remnant of the way we've traditionally planned. We're used to planning, in weeks with in a Gantt format. And, people plug in 5 days. What am I going to do this week, as opposed to what does the actual task take?
Right.
So it's not a zero-based approach where you're actually, what's the level of effort I'm going to need to do? It's more of, well, I know it's going to take me 2.5 days, but the last job I was on, that didn't happen because of X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to say 5.
What does that do?
So what does that do? So if you end up doing it done in 3 days, which is the real time that's required, and whoever's fallen behind you has got other commitments, then you potentially lose 2 days of production on the job site if people can't move in immediately behind you. So that's a challenge. And conversely, if you say 5 days and it takes you 6, then whoever's following you shows up on day 6 with their crew, and now they've got to find some type of workable backlog somewhere else, or worse, get sent off the site, which is probably not going to happen.
And that's why the daily huddle is so important, so everyone understands exactly what's being accomplished each day, what's going to be accomplished the next day, so that a crew is taking maybe an extra day to do something. The follow-up crew understands that, so they're not going to show up for the site, or they're going to be doing something else on the site, not what they had originally planned. So it helps everybody understand, so the work continues to flow and the project keeps getting better.
Okay, sandbagging commitments. So I think Ken talked about this 4 weeks ago when he did the Last Planner 101 presentation. But we see this a lot, and this all comes back to really, it's kind of fundamentally lack of trust in the ability to people to deliver what they say. And so as trust builds in the team, sandbagging goes away. There's no question about that. But kind of coming back to the 5-day curse and the 5-day durations, people will put buffer into their activities because they don't want to be penalized, if you will, for what others do or don't do. And I remember going to a project at San Diego State once upon a time. Contractor remained nameless, but they were tracking their PPC for the total project, percent plan complete, as well as for the trades. And there were 3 trades that had hit 100% plan complete every week for the last 3 months. And it's pretty obvious to us that they were sandbagging, because they said, well, if I'm going to be measured on that, then I'm going to make certain I hit 100% every week. I'm going to put buffer in there. And what they probably did is that, that probably cost the project 2-3 weeks over that period of, 3 months, just so that people, so people have to understand that they're not being penalized if they don't hit 100% every week. We worked with a refinery project up in near Bellingham and Ferndale, up near where Paul Akers has his fast cap factory. But the same thing happened there, and that people, the craft were really reluctant. Well, I'm going to be measured. I'm going to get a grade, and wow, 75% is like just barely passing in school. What happens if I get a 75, or whatever happens if I get a 54? Man, that's a failing grade. So there was a lot of angst tied to that, and just really making people understand, hey, what we really want is you to honestly commit what the time it needs to complete this task. What's the predecessor that's going to release your work? And if you don't meet the commitment, an honest assessment of why you missed the commitment, so that we can learn from it. So, yeah. Okay, so one of the other things, so we start, once again, talk about complex projects or projects with a lot of repetitive work. Think data centers. I mean, $1 billion data center is going to have a bunch of data halls. Okay, if you're building a new patient tower for healthcare, it's going to have a bunch of patient floors. Okay, a lot of repetitive work. So one of the things that teams don't do that they could really benefit from is to really understand what is the workflow in this particular space. So this is actually a clean room project, and multiple clean rooms tied to this. I don't remember how many there were on this project, maybe half a dozen clean rooms, but there were enough where it made sense to really understand how are we going to tackle this clean room and really make certain everyone had a clear common understanding of how we were going to do that, because we're going to do this 6 times. So let's figure it out how to do it, as best we can the first time, then do a retrospective and see how we can improve for, downstream on the subsequent ones to come. Okay. So there's the conversations that are happening. Here's what the actual system looked like afterwards. There's some numbers that are tied to all this, but really what we tried to do is use this to help inform a TAC plan that came out of a last planner poll. Okay. And TAC planning is Last Planner System 301. So there you go. Okay, so some of the other things that we see teams do, they may do the visual planning, but they don't measure the key performance indicators, okay, which would be your % plan complete, or in the case of design using Scrum, your burn down rate, okay? And what we find is that teams that don't monitor that tend to have, I guess, average performances, as opposed to really being in a position where they really know where they're at and making the appropriate adjustments in real time. So this is a real project. And you can see this is their % plan complete over a period of time. Started out kind of rough, and there are a lot of reasons for that. There were some unknown site conditions and some other constraints that really created some problems for the team. But the real point of this graph is to show you that there's a lot of variability in their % plan complete. So they do not have a stable workflow on this project, and that's creating problems for them. And so how would you know that if you weren't charting it, number one? And then number two would, okay, we keep seeing these peaks and valleys. Why is that happening? And why are we hitting some of these low numbers? And it begs questions so that the team can learn from it and get better, okay? So if you're doing that, if you're missing these commitments, you should really be tracking them. I know Ken in his last Planner 101 shared 13 reasons of variance, if you will, or for missed commitments. But the idea is this. So this is just a graph that we put together. It's not a real project, but what it is it shows you that out of the 13 things that we talked about, what are some of the elements that could be there? And the idea behind the Pareto chart, some people haven't heard of Pareto, but you have heard of the 80-20 rule, and that comes from Wilfredo Pareto. But the idea is this, that 80% of your problems can be come from 20% of the issues, okay? So the idea here is, if we look at the right-hand side, you'll see that it goes from 0 to 120, but at the 80%, that's the 80-20 rule, okay? And the orange line that kind of goes up in the middle is the probability curve goes up to 100%, but at the 80% line, everything that falls to the left of that should consider focusing your attention on. And I would say that even if you didn't do any type of simple analysis like the 80-20 rule, just look at the big bars, okay? Or if you're doing a pie chart, the big chunks of the pie. So obviously manpower, or should say labor deficiency, don't want to be sexist here, is an issue that needs to be addressed. And okay, now we need to do a deeper dive into why that is. And 5 why, and it could be, we find all kinds of interesting things. Sometimes it may be cash flow issue. It may be that the market is really busy. It may be that the contractor has a labor union issue. It could be a wide variety of things. Maybe that you can't get people into the space. I mean, we were on one project up at Stanford where they were doing a medium voltage replacement project, and they could literally only get 2 people into the manhole or utility hole in order to do the work. So they're constrained with what they can actually do. But the idea here is that learning from your miscommitments, okay? Miscommitments aren't necessarily a bad thing. They're really an opportunity and a gold mine for, learning how to get better.
And also going back to when you're doing the charts, letting those who are doing the work understand, tell us, truly why you missed that commitment. And if they can see that you're charting it, it takes the burden off of them if they weren't able to accomplish something that they had promised. well, maybe it's because there was no access to the work area. Maybe there's unforeseen conditions. There's a lot of other reasons. It wasn't just because they missed their commitment because they did poor planning. They might have had their planning correct, but subsequent or previous planning or site conditions didn't allow them. So if you're charting it, it helps those trades understand that the burden and the fault is not always going to be pointed at them.
Yeah. So I'll share one other war story, and then another contractor, to remain nameless, but a national contractor, not headquartered in California, but somewhere else in the country. Actually collected data on all of their last planner projects like this, and rather than manpower deficiency, the #1 cause of their missed commitments was quote unquote changing priorities. And so I had the, I guess, the uncomfortable position of telling them what's another name for changing priorities, and that's poor planning. And I think you need to do a deeper dive into, why are the priorities changing? Because that reflects, a failure in the planning process. And that was an interesting conversation, but without the data, you wouldn't know. Okay. All right. So on to Act 3. Last planner technology support and solutions. So I know that there are some people here that are very interested in that. And COVID-19 has certainly created a little bit more of that to this. But what I want to start with is, don't forget the importance of the conversations. I mean, the last planner system is very powerful. Scrum is very powerful, but it's people that do this, okay? And the conversations that happen at the wall, or the conversations that happen in the Zoom breakout room or a daily stand-up, are really the grease that makes this work, okay? So don't forget that, then just start relying on technology to solve the problem. It's going to be the people that solve the problem, and tied to that. Okay, so this is something that Summer and I think is really, really cool. It's a Post-it app, okay? You can get this on any iOS device, so your iPhone, your iPad. It's also available on Android. But it's free. Download it from Post-it, and what it does is you just take a snapshot through the app, and it creates a board for you. Actually, I was going to drop a slide in that showed Summer and I did a planning session for this, and she took a picture of it.
So for each picture that you take, it calls it a board. So the first photo will be a board 1. And subsequently B or 2, 3, 4. And once you've taken all those pictures, you go to the board, it has them, and then you can rearrange all of those pictures however you want. And then you can individually take the Post-its and move the Post-its. You can draw lines between the Post-its, and then you can actually add your own new Post-it and put it wherever you want. So it was just a really fabulous, app. And it also has the ability to read handwriting. So that was really,
which for me,
yeah,
it's pretty powerful if it can read my handwriting.
Yeah.
There you go.
So that was a real fun app to get and to work with.
Yeah. So if you don't get anything else out of tonight, get this app on your phone, because you can use it for capturing any kind of wall work that you do with Post-its.
What was the name again of the app?
Post-it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Post-it.
Just go for Post-it brand. So Post-it app. You can see right here at the top of the phone there. Okay, a couple of other things that are worth noting, particularly for Scrum. So we've already talked a little bit about Trello, but there are others as well. So there's a product called Miro, which is pretty powerful, and it does more than just Scrum or Agile work. It does user story maps. If you're into design thinking, it allows you to do retrospectives, allows you to do mind mapping. But here's a Kanban board here in this case. So the Kanban board is essentially your Scrum board. Okay, so you got a backlog, in progress, and done, color coded. You can do this in real time with Cassie, Leslie, Trevor, and Jules. So pretty powerful thing.
I was using Zoom on a call, and they also had Miro. So we went into breakout rooms, and those each individual, that we had 36 people who were participating, and there were 6 people per breakout room, and we were all able to get Post-its, write on Post-its, and talk. They could interact audioly. So it was a really fabulous products that we could jot things down, talk, and capture it,
Yeah.
memorialize it, and then share it with others when we came back into Zoom, into the 36 individuals.
Okay, and so here's a daily stand-up board. So once again, we talk about Scrum, or in the case of a construction site, if you wanted to do this for your daily huddle, I guess you could as well. But the idea here is, all those that are participating, hey, what'd you do yesterday? What are you working on today? And then, there'll be a discussion about, is anything holding you up? What can we do to go faster? Okay. All right, then there's also Mural.co. It's not com, it's .co, but Mural. And it also allows, live interaction. In this case, it's really kind of this one is just a brainstorming chart, but they have other options available. I know that Dan Poche and his team use this for some last planner work. So I wanted to put it in there for those that are interested in learning more. But you can move the tags. Some people have said it's a little clunky, but
I haven't tried it.
yeah, try it and see whether you like it. Okay. All right. Then there's a company that we've been working with, and in full disclosure, we don't get anything out of any of this thing from technology. I mean, we're kind of technology agnostic, but this is a product or software that's been developed over in Europe and is starting to see widespread use in Europe as well as the Middle East. And we have one project that started using this that we're supporting in Orange County. They just started last week, and LAX, the project we just shared with you, is going to use this on the smallest of the terminals to really kind of give it a test run before they look at it in a bigger case. But let's look a little bit more about it. So what is pretty cool about this is that you can import from pretty much any platform into their platform, okay? Whether you're using P6, whether Microsoft Project, Vico, Synchro. It also has a 4D capability. I'm not going to get too much into that tonight, but 4D tied to Last Planner can be really, really powerful. So all of these software solutions that you see up here very easily integrate into their system. Okay, so they have both a Gantt chart view as well as what they call a lean production view, which is essentially a Last Planner, but color coded. It captures the history for all the changes. It talks about constraints. There actually forces those that are assigned a task to check all the boxes related to constraints before the work is made ready. So it really forces those that are involved in the task to really do some thinking. Okay. Oh, look at this. Ooh. All right. So anyhow, this is kind of a little video demo in here. I'd forgotten that this particular slide did that. So, but anyhow, I'll keep moving on here. So here's the digital Last Planner system, and it's color coded. So things that are in purple are basically started. Those that are in red have not. Green, you can see they got some warning tasks there, which probably means it hasn't been made work ready yet. But anyhow, very quickly, you can see by the color and who owns this, whether it's done. You can click on any tag and, it gives you all the information tied to it. Once again, this is another video animation, which we don't need to watch, but here's the dashboard, okay? So once you have this populated and you're updating this on a weekly basis, what it does is it gives you reasons for warnings, which means that work is not ready for some reason, reasons for stoppages. You can filter the data so that it gives you the percent plan complete for the overall project, or for certain team members if you really wanted to look and do a deeper dive. Total number of tasks. Then you can actually do a sort this way as well. So it's pretty powerful. I've really been impressed with what this particular platform can do, and I'll give you more feedback after we've had a couple of projects under our belt to let you know how it went. Still going with that. Now, so here's the app. Okay, so basically the the way this works is that it's a project basis license agreement. So anyone on the project can be assigned tasks tied to this. So if you have a job that's got 40 trades, and you need both PMs and foremen, as well as your project engineers and your staff, and even design team members, you can easily add however many people you need. Access it mobily. So, that's a big deal in the COVID-19 environment. The other thing that they've recently done is a safe distance planning thing that they've added on to their platform. And what this is really tied to the 2 metering distancing requirement in Europe right now for social distancing on the job force. And so what they're doing is, with the integration of the building information model tied to this and the work plan that is planned for the job, they can basically look at what areas are going to be okay with respect to the social distancing requirement of 2 meters, which ones are kind of at the limit, and which ones are overloaded. Okay, so in this case, you can see here that patio A01 is kind of overloaded, and location A overall is overloaded, which means that probably as a team, if you're wanting to look at COVID-19 social distancing requirements, you probably need to think about maybe resequencing some of the work in such a manner that you can make that happen. So pretty powerful, and it gets tied into GPS location base for phones and other types of things too, if you wanted to monitor that in real time. Just a quick sample project from them. So this is also in Ireland. So Willie, I don't know if you're still with us, but this is a MACE project, and this is a data center project that they were doing. I like the big room configuration. I mean, look at all the walls with all of the big screens on there. That's pretty impressive. But they've got the 3D model adjacent to the actual plan, and just pretty powerful. So what's the outcome of that? Well, here's what they found. So they've done 3 of these data halls, and the first one took them 21 weeks, and they're using lean in all these. So they were using lean methods, and as they've gotten it integrated into using this platform, it's gone down to 9 weeks. Okay, and all that translates into significant, cost savings for everybody involved. So, pretty big deal. Okay, so what are some of the other solutions out there? TouchPlan is one that you'll hear a lot about. They market very heavily here in the United States. Hal McCumber now is part of their organization, who is a former colleague of Greg Howell, who we talked about earlier tonight. And I think from a visual planning perspective, this works great for 6-week make work ready planning. We used this on a project up at Stanford, but it's not very robust with respect to phase polls or milestone plans and some of the other types of things. But for 6-week make work ready planning, it's a good product. Okay, and this gives you some sense of how it works. It's not a very steep learning curve. Almost all these solutions can operate off of a mobile device now, whether it's an iPad or some type of a smartphone platform. vPlanner is pretty robust. We've used vPlanner on a number of projects, and it actually forces you to use the logic tied to what work releases your work. And so that is something that a lot of teams don't do a good job of doing, is defining their predecessors and what releases their work. vPlanner will force you to do that. Okay. And it's very robust, but it requires a lot of input on the front end and a lot of maintenance tied to it. So, okay. So you can see here that you have swim lanes. So 6-week look ahead, and you can say this level 1, floor 1, where you're sequencing things. So pretty powerful. Also can isolate the longest path by looking at the durations. And what that does is that if you miss commitments for some reason, this is the thing I think vPlanner is one of the features is very strong, is if you miss a commitment, what it will tell you or predict is that it will predict which of the downstream tags will be adversely impacted. In this case, you'll see that the number of the tags here in kind of the center lane have a red around them. That means that those have been adversely impacted by a task down the line. Okay. All right, so what does this look like? This is up at actually Stanford. And you can see here that, you know, how do you end up doing this? This is a big project up in Stanford. But you can see you got tags on the wall. You can also see that you have vPlanner plotted out. And so what happens is that when you start running out of space, so I mean, at some point, if you have a very large project, you will be constrained by the amount of wall space you have. And then you have to think about some type of digital solution to help you manage that more effectively. So this is one of the ways that they did it on this project, where they also used Post-its in concert with actual plot outs and updating the, putting the plots up and updating those as well. And then working with the Post-its for new phase polls and that type of work. Okay. All right, so kind of getting close to the end here, but Autodesk does have a suite of products. Obviously, the BIM 360 plan was actually a result of their purchase of our plan from DPR a number of years ago, and they've integrated into their BIM 360 suite. To be honest with you, I only know one company in Europe that's used this. I don't know any other companies that have. Doesn't mean there aren't, just I don't know any. But if you're on a BIM 360 platform, and you're using Glue and some of these field and docs and some other things, it may make sense for you to explore this as an option, you know, tied to that. I also want to say that there's a product out there by Oracle, but if you go to their Oracle website, you'll find that there's absolutely zero visual about it on their website at all. And I think it's really kind of a push-pull where they're really trying to use Last Planner to feed into P6. And I guess that's okay, provided that, you know, that's the way you want to manage your job. Okay. So I think that takes us to questions. So hopefully we've addressed the three acts satisfactorily and gave you something to think about. And we'll go back to our screen and see what kind of questions that we have. Maybe.
There are some on the chat, David, if you want to check directly.
Yeah, I've got a.
They were just posted. So there is one from Chantel.
Okay, have you used Nareva for design? No, we have not. So we can't comment on that intelligently one way or the other.
There is a previous one from Pam.
Okay, do these programs allow multiple users to enter their own tags, or is access limited? The answer is it depends on the program, Pam. But in general terms, people have access to their tags, but not other people's tags, so that, you know, people can update their information, but not do things that they shouldn't be doing with other people's tags. I think that's pretty universal. That's a good thing. Okay. Yeah. And then Kyle asked about possibly get a recording of 101 if we didn't attend. Yeah, send me an email, Kyle, and we'll send you a link. Somebody asked about Fibonacci. So how do you explain the Fibonacci value system so people don't put 34 on each one? Okay, well, you ask them to break it down. You know, the simpler solution is probably this. When we introduce it, say that it's got to be a number of 21 or less. So just take 34 off the table, kind of like in Last Planner when we go out to job sites or projects, we say no durations longer than 10 days in a phase pool. And people will want to do you know, 20 days or 30 days or 60 days, whatever it happens to be, but inevitably they can break it down. But I think it's just a matter of telling people don't go above 21 unless you want to talk about it first. I think that's probably the right way to do it. And then anything that goes above 21 in the Fibonacci sequence can probably be broken down into some more smaller chunks.
But also what happens is it's a learning curve. People, you know, select a number that they feel is going to be the right number of effort for what they're doing. Because each person who writes the tag will have to identify their Fibonacci number on the level of effort for their tag. And as the team starts to work through this, they'll realize and either they're spot on with their numbers, or wow, it took me a lot longer than I realized. So that type of a task for me takes longer, or a shorter duration. So there's going to be that learning curve that's going to take them a short amount of time to really learn how to really identify those numbers and the level of effort that they're going to have.
Yeah. So kind of add on to that, people go, well, gee, you know, what if it's an 8 or a 13? And the idea is that what'll happen is it doesn't really matter whether people are looking at it differently within the design team. So my 8 is your 13. But what happens is that as you go through the burn down chart, as long as you're hitting what you need to hit for your burn down, you're okay. It doesn't matter whether it's an 8 or 13 or 34. So that's the key.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept just to understand, but people do get a lot better at it. It takes them several weeks to get really good at it, but by the time they really start to understand it, they become very comfortable with identifying the correct numbers for their level of task that they have.
Okay. Any other questions?
Hey, Davis, Chris, some questions. Can you talk a little bit more about the back and forth and the interface in a phase between Scrum and pool planning? Because it seems like what we've been experimenting with is discipline-based Scrum coming off of the phase planning work. And our discipline team for a decent-sized project would have 100 or more discipline-based, architecture-only, right, tasks on their Scrum boards. That's so much that's not relevant to the rest of the team. We've kind of broken it up that way a little bit. And I don't know if you've seen others do that, or can you just talk a little bit about the back and forth of that process?
Yeah. So the kind of the key there, I think, is kind of twofold, Chris. Well, maybe threefold. One, something that works for you. So that's got to be kind of key. But two, trying to keep the groups to a manageable size, because you start getting to the size where you have 20 or 30 people in a Scrum session, that's too many. Okay, so breaking it into smaller groups is probably good from a cluster perspective. So thinking back to target value design, then where are the points of intersection?
Yeah.
Where those you need to have that coordination so that people aren't off doing what they think is the right thing, and it turns out that it's not the right thing. And the other thing is making certain that those sprints are short, okay, so that you don't have the opportunity to kind of overstretch and then have to do rework tied to that, so that those are kind of some of the keys that we would see, teams do that. And certainly on the process side, there's a lot that goes on in the type of work that your firm does. So.
Yeah, we've even just, architecturally speaking, which is really, can be relatively agnostic. We've struggled to try and even track velocity because, again, what portions of the velocity do you try and track, right? If you're tracking everything that is a group interface, that's a small portion of the work that architectural team is actually executing, right? Or when you have multiple people working on multiple projects at the same time, it just gets really squirrely. It seems like Scrum, to the full extent, is only good when you have people dedicated to projects and not really doing anything else.
Well, I'm not certain. I think that most of the Scrum applications that you see in design, that tends to be their primary focus.
Yeah.
But almost even in the LA team that we saw there, a lot of the disciplines were not present physically. They might show up on the job for 1 or 2 days a week during the design, but they were remote, and yeah, they have multiple projects. But the thing is that whatever their input that was required for the team, had to be integrated into that. Otherwise, that becomes a potential, bottleneck and a problem for the team.
Yeah, it just seems hard at some point, hard to track velocity, right? What is the team's capable velocity versus what they're actually doing? And that's just something that I haven't been able to figure out really yet.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah. I would ask why are you tracking the velocity? Because we see a lot of teams don't do that. I mean, the main thing is to make certain that you're hitting your burn down. If you're doing that, then that's the key.
Yeah, well, but you have to kind of say what you're capable of in order to factor your burn down, right? You have to say, I have 300 points that I need to burn down. Okay, I have 5 people, so therefore I have to do, a certain number of points a week to do that burn down. And when I don't have people that are dedicated to the project, it's hard to guarantee that week that I can hit that, velocity. It just gets, I don't know. myself.
Well, I think what you're missing here is the Scrum Master. Okay.
Yeah, probably.
The Scrum Master, that's the Scrum Master's role, is to make certain that removing those roadblocks.
Mhm.
Yeah. Other questions? Now we're going to give you your evening back. So we got to do plus delta first. And the other thing that we have is series number 3 in this is going to be a lean coffee to talk about, your experiences. So Chris, kind of to your point right now, has anyone else had these challenges? Is that something you want to talk about? But the question for the greater group is a lean coffee or a lean happy hour virtually preferred, meaning 5 o'clock, some other time of day. You can respond in the chat box. That would be helpful, just to let us know if you were interested in participating in a lean coffee or happy hour. What your preference would be. And I don't know, Thais, if you got anything else you want to add to that, but